I was catching up with a friend recently. He's roughly the same age as me. He's probably about 59 or 60. And in the course of that conversation of catching up, he was talking about some changes that he was contemplating making in his life. And, the more we talked about it, he had said, at this point, at this stage of my life, why bother? I really just don't feel like starting over again. And that really stuck with me because it's a feeling that I am very, very familiar with, and maybe some of you are too. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I've been going through this process of reinvention starting about 6 years ago when I was in my mid-50s. And a lot of change has been centered around this mindset that I had really my whole life of, I'm just too old. It's too late for me to do something new, to start again. And I remember having that mindset when I was even 35. It's like, oh, well, I'm 35. I've got a wife. I've got kids. Why bother? 40. Geez, I wish I had started X, Y, and Z when I was 35. And I didn't do it because I lived with that feeling of, well, it's too late because I'm 40. I should have done it when I was 35. And having those same types of thoughts when I was 45, 50, 55, until I reached that point, that dark night of the soul moment that I talked about in one of my other videos, to where I knew something needed to change. And he didn't necessarily ask me for any advice. I didn't offer it. He didn't ask for it. It was just more in the context of a conversation, and it just wasn't the right setting anyway. But he is at least familiar with a lot of the changes that I've gone through on my own over the last several years. So if he ever does ask me, I would say to him the same thing that I would say to you if it's something that you're struggling with. And it's really all centered around a mindset shift around how we think about our age. I think that once we get to that certain point, the 50s, the 60s, we are how we are. We're just never going to change. I remember struggling for the longest time with those same thoughts and feelings. And what finally started to shift for me was just the slightest change in my mindset about my age and this whole notion of, why bother starting over at 55? Why bother starting over at 60? And it's really the way I started to think about it. And I would say this to him, which is, I finally realized I'm not starting over. I have 55 years of experience behind me to know what it is in my life that works, what it is in my life that doesn't work, what I will accept, how I want to think, what thought patterns and things that had been going on in my life for the previous 55 years that worked and didn't work. I wasn't really starting over. I was starting from a point of having all this lived experience. So just that little change in perspective helped me understand that I'm really not starting over. I wasn't starting over at 55. I was starting something new, but I was starting something new based upon what I had already lived. And I think that's a perspective that as we get into our 50s and 60s, due to that lived experience, that somebody in their 20s or 30s just doesn't have the benefit of that. They don't have the benefit of the time and the experience that we've gone through over the years. So that little shift in my perspective of how I looked at my age really helped me and helped educate me as to where I wanted to go, because I had a roadmap. I wasn't going to go back to doing the same things the way that I had been for so long. And I would say the same thing to him at this point. I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of change he's making. That's not about not what it's all about. It's just about that little shift in perspective can make the biggest difference in the world. I think that we sometimes use our age as a limitation. It we use our age as a cage. It keeps us within this little box of things that we feel that we can and can't do just based upon how old we are. And okay, there are some things that the world imposes upon us, like, I'm not going to go out and be a CIA agent at 61 because you can't do it. But for the most part, that's just self-imposed limitations of our age that we put upon ourselves. And the way I like to look at it is, if you picture a football field, a 100-yard football field, well, you're trying to get into the end zone. We're not starting from the 1-yard line. If you look at your age, just say your age is a yard marker. For me, I was starting at the 55-yard line. I already knew what was behind me and what I didn't want to take part in anymore. In reality, it's not our age itself that limits us. It's the way we think about our age. And in reality, age is our superpower. It's what allows us to make decisions about our future, about things that we're contemplating changing. It's the very thing that helps us to make better decisions based upon things that we've already lived through. So we're not starting from scratch. We are going into the second half of our life in a way that other people can't, because we already know what works, what doesn't work, and how we want to be. So if you're someone who's contemplating making a change and you've been struggling with those thoughts of, it's just too late, I just don't want to start over, maybe a slight shift in your perspective about how we think about time and how we think about our age and what that really means. If you can try to view it in a slightly different way, as opposed to it being, like I've said, a limitation or something that prevents you from moving forward, a slight shift in perspective may help you along the way. I hope that the video has provided some value for you. If you got something out of it, I hope you'd consider subscribing to the channel and staying tuned for more videos. And I'll see you in the next one.